My name is Margaret Ellison. My husband kept a secret buried beneath our home for 10 years, and I slept above it, made dinner above it, laughed above it. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started with a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. One night, sometime past midnight, I stirred in bed beside my husband, Harold. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of wood shifting in the walls. Then came the whisper, a low, raspy sound escaping from Harold's lips. He was asleep, but I distinctly heard him say, "Don't make noise. You'll get locked down again." At first, I thought I was dreaming. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize it away. Maybe it was a fragment of an old conversation, a ghost of his teaching days. Harold used to be a strict disciplinarian at the local high school. But something about the tone, so intimate, so cold, tightened around my chest like a belt. I told myself not to overthink it. But the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling. The words echoed in my mind as I poured Harold's coffee, as I watched him hum while folding the morning newspaper. I studied his face, those familiar lines, the soft skin sagging gently beneath his eyes, and I wondered, what did I miss? We'd been married for 35 years. I knew the sound of his anger, the scent of his cologne, the way his lip twitched when he lied about small things. But this was something else. Later that day, while Harold was out picking up a new part for his old truck, I stood in the hallway and stared at the basement door. It was always locked. Always. Our home wasn't particularly big, but that door had become something of a joke between us over the years. "Don't bother going down there," Harold would say. "It's just a mess of insulation and broken tools, probably rats." I'd never once seen him go in or come out with anything. Still, I'd believed him. I had no reason not to, until now. I reached for the doorknob on instinct. As expected, it didn't turn, but I noticed something else, scratches around the lock. Faint, like someone had tried to get out. My heart began to pound. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how fast my thoughts were racing. "It's probably nothing," I told myself. "Old houses make weird sounds. Locks wear out. People mumble in their sleep. This is just you." Margaret being dramatic. But the whisper, the scratches, the locked door. That night, I dreamed of a boy crying in the dark. I didn't recognize his face, but I woke up feeling like I'd known him forever. The following morning, I brought up the basement as casually as I could. We were eating breakfast, scrambled eggs, overdone bacon, burnt toast, as always. "Do you think we should finally clean out the basement?" I asked. "Maybe turn it into a proper storage room?" Harold didn't answer right away. His fork paused midair. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and there was something foreign in his eyes. Not anger, not confusion. Something tighter, like a rope being pulled behind his eyeballs. He said flatly, "I told you there's nothing down there." I know I smiled, brushing it off. "But wouldn't it be nice to fix it up? Maybe put in shelves, or—" His fist hit the table. The sound made my heart jolt. The coffee cup wobbled dangerously near the edge. Bacon grease danced on the plate. I said no. He growled. "Why do you always need to poke around where you don't belong?" I stared at him, stunned. Harold had never been that kind of man. Stern, yes. Short-tempered sometimes. But violent, never. I sat there in silence as he returned to his food, chewing with a hard, mechanical rhythm. I didn't mention the basement again that day, or the next. But something had snapped. And once a thread breaks, it only takes a tug to unravel the rest. The days blurred together in slow tension. I became hypersensitive to every sound, the creaks in the hallway, the shifting of the floorboards. I began waking up at night and sitting on the edge of the bed, just listening. One evening, when Harold fell asleep early after a couple glasses of whiskey, I wandered into the hallway again. My hand hovered over the doorknob of the basement. Locked. Still locked. But this time, I knelt down and placed my ear to the door. At first, nothing. Then, a faint thud. Then another. I pressed closer. A shuffle, a soft, choked breath. I staggered back as if struck. I didn't know what I had heard, but I knew it wasn't a pipe. It wasn't rats. It was human. I sat in the living room the rest of the night, the glow of the television flickering while I stared at nothing. My thoughts spiraled, colliding with fragments of the past strange noises I had dismissed, the way Harold always insisted on fixing things himself, the neighbors who avoided our property, the way we never had guests anymore. Then the memory hit me like a freight train. The baby. Our son. Daniel. He was our third child, born fragile with breathing issues. I was told he didn't survive. Harold said he passed in the hospital after a long night. I was sedated in and out of consciousness. It was all a blur. They never let me hold him. I never even saw the body. But what if... I clutched my chest, gasping. No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. But if it was, I had already spent 10 years sleeping on top of a lie. And now I had to decide, was I ready to dig into the truth, even if it meant destroying everything I thought I knew. The door had always been locked, but I had never truly questioned why. For years I'd told myself it wasn't important. There were so many little things I learned not to push with Harold. I thought that was love, leaving some mysteries alone, letting silence fill the cracks. But now, every time I passed the basement door, it felt like it was breathing, watching me, daring me. I started noticing everything. There was a scuff mark on the floorboards in front of the door, not random, not old. It looked recent, as though someone had been dragged or had leaned too hard against it. The kind of mark that couldn't be made by furniture or pets. One morning, when Harold was out chopping firewood, I pressed my hand to the door and just stood there. I don't know how long I stayed like that, minutes maybe, long enough to feel the chill rising from the crack at the bottom. A cold I hadn't felt anywhere else in the house. Then I knocked. Once, twice. Nothing. Then, a whisper. I couldn't hear words. Just movement. Breath. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped on the hallway rug. My heart thundered. I told myself again and again, maybe it's plumbing, maybe there's an animal, maybe, but the truth was beginning to stand up in my mind. The next few days were unbearable. Harold kept up his routine, quiet mornings, loud sighs, passive-aggressive grunts when I asked him about the news or made suggestions for dinner. But he watched me now. I felt it in his sideways glances, the sudden way he entered rooms I was in, as if checking whether I had opened something I wasn't supposed to. He didn't say anything about the basement, but his body did. One night, I waited until he was asleep. I stood by the basement door again, holding a flashlight in one hand and a bobby pin in the other. I had no training in locks, but I remembered my mother used to open her locked jewelry boxes with a bent pin. I knew it was stupid, childish even, but I had to try. I crouched in front of the lock and started fiddling. Click, click, nothing. I kept at it. My hand cramped. My knees ached. But I kept at it. And then, footsteps. I froze. The hallway light flipped on. Harold stood behind me in his robe, his face a shadow of disbelief and rising fury. What are you doing? I stood up slowly, hiding the pin in my sleeve. I dropped something. It rolled under the door. Don't lie to me, Margaret. His voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. It was the kind of tone I had heard him use on disobedient students back when he taught. Cold. Final. You said this door was broken, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But it's not. And it's locked from our side. Why? He didn't answer. He just stared at me, lips pursed, eyes unreadable. I deserve to know what's behind this door. There are things you don't want to know, he said flatly. I'm not afraid of the truth. You should be. He stepped forward, took my wrist gently, almost lovingly, and turned me away from the door. It's late, he murmured. Go to bed. I didn't resist. I should have. But I didn't. I went to bed and cried quietly into my pillow while Harold's breathing returned to a steady rhythm beside me. The next morning, I called my daughter. Lena had moved out nearly 6 years ago, just after college. She never came home much. Always had excuses. Work. Travel. Bad weather. I used to think she just didn't want to be around us. around me. But now I wondered if she had known something. We met at the park, neutral ground. She looked thinner than I remembered, pale, tired. "I need to ask you something," I said after the briefest of pleasantries. "And I need you to answer me honestly." She nodded slowly. "Do you remember the basement?" She stiffened. "Your father always said it was just storage. But did you ever hear anything?" Lena looked around the park like someone might be watching. Then she said something that almost made me drop my coffee. "I used to have dreams about someone calling my name from below the floor." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "When I was a kid," she said, her voice low, "I'd lie in bed and hear whispering. I told Dad once. He got so angry, said I was imagining it. Then I never heard it again. I thought maybe I was crazy." "You're not," I whispered. She stared at me for a long time. Then she whispered back, "Is someone down there?" I nodded, slowly. We sat in silence after that, but I saw it in her face, the same realization, the same gut punch of memory surfacing. I couldn't pretend anymore. I wasn't just imagining things. The door wasn't just locked. It was hiding something, someone. And I was going to find out who, no matter what it cost. I thought I was prepared for whatever would come next. I wasn't. After that meeting with Lena, the days turned thick with tension, like every moment was soaked in a truth I couldn't speak aloud. I stopped asking Harold questions directly. Instead, I watched him. Every move, every expression. And slowly, things I had never noticed began to jump out at me. The padlock on the basement door had been changed. It was newer, shinier. Still basic, not industrial or anything that would draw suspicion, but it hadn't been there a few months ago. I remembered because when we first moved in, Harold claimed the basement door never needed locking, only that it was unsafe for kids to go poking around. Now it seemed the danger wasn't structural, it was personal. Harold had grown more irritable, more cautious. He never left his keys out anymore. They used to hang from a nail in the kitchen right next to the back door. But now they were always on him, even at night, tucked under his pillow. And then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember because that was the day Harold always went to town to pick up dry goods and visit the hardware store. He would usually be gone for at least an hour and a half. As soon as I heard his truck engine fade into the distance, I went to the basement door with my flashlight again, just in case. Still locked. But this time I noticed something else. Faintly, barely perceptible, the sound of something dragging, like fabric over concrete. Then a pause. Then two gentle taps. Tap! Tap! I froze. My eyes filled with tears without my permission. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Whoever, whatever, was behind that door had heard me. I pressed my palm flat against the wood. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm listening." A pause. Then a scrape, almost like someone shifting their weight, maybe crawling closer. "Can you speak?" I asked. Silence. Then so faint I thought it might have been my imagination. "Please." It was a boy's voice. Or a man's, but thin, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. My knees buckled. I slid to the floor, holding my chest. It was real. There was someone down there. A person. And I had heard him. That evening, I tried to act normal when Harold came home. He barely looked at me as he unloaded canned beans and batteries onto the counter. "How was town?" I asked. "Fine." "See anyone we know?" "No." I nodded. "I think the basement's leaking again." I saw some watermarks near the floor. His head snapped up. "What were you doing near the basement?" I smiled. "Laundry." "Isn't that where you keep the mop?" He stared at me, a long, cold, evaluating stare. Then he said, "Don't go near that door again. I mean it." His voice was quiet, but final. The kind of tone that used to shut down entire dinner conversations. And for the first time in our marriage, I didn't listen. The next day, I started searching the house for anything. Clues, old keys, documents. I tore through closets, checked jacket linings, unscrewed vents, and emptied drawers. I knew it was reckless, but my fear had transformed. It wasn't fear of Harold anymore. It was fear that I had allowed something monstrous to happen under my nose. In the garage inside an old shoebox beneath a stack of broken holiday lights, I found something. A folder. Inside it, birth certificates. 3 names I recognized: Lena, our oldest, Carl, our middle child, and Daniel the baby I thought I lost at birth. But here was the horrifying part. Daniel's birth certificate had no date of death, no hospital discharge summary, just a birth certificate, which meant legally Daniel had never died. He had just disappeared. I staggered back the folder, trembling in my hands. I remembered the hospital. I'd been on heavy medication. I remembered waking up to Harold sitting beside the bed, his hand cold and stiff as he told me our son didn't make it. I remember sobbing into his shirt, the unbearable grief. And now I realized I'd never seen a death certificate. Not then, not ever. That night, Harold was quiet again. I cooked dinner, roast chicken, his favorite, and waited until he was settled in front of the television with a glass of bourbon. Then I asked him, not directly, just carefully, "Do you ever think about Daniel?" He blinked. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Bring up the past." "I think about him sometimes," I continued. "I wonder what he would have been like if he'd lived." Harold didn't even look up from the screen. "You're obsessing. That's not healthy." "I found his birth certificate today." That got his attention. Slowly he turned to me. His face didn't change, but his body did. His shoulders tensed, hands pressing deeper into the armrests. "So, there's no death certificate. It got lost." "Did it?" I tilted my head. "Or was it never made?" Silence. I whispered, "Is he still alive?" Harold stood. Not abruptly, not violently, just stood. Calm, controlled. And then he walked to me, bent down, and kissed my forehead. "You don't want to go digging, Margaret. Not in places where your memories don't reach. Sometimes forgetting is the only thing that keeps a family together." He walked upstairs and closed the bedroom door. I sat at the table, my appetite gone, the chicken turning cold on our plates. I had my answer. He wasn't denying it anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the basement door until morning. And when the sun rose, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever I had to do next, I would do it alone. Because the man I had married was no longer my husband. He was a stranger with a secret buried beneath our floor, and I was going to find the truth, even if it shattered everything I'd ever believed about my life. I needed help, but who could I trust? Harold had isolated me so thoroughly over the years that I hadn't even noticed. Friends had faded. Family was distant. Even Lena, despite our talk in the park, had seemed too fragile to face what might be real. I couldn't ask her to do this. Not yet. So I turned to the people who might know something, even if they didn't know they knew it. The neighbors. We'd lived in this neighborhood for over 2 decades. Quiet, middle-class, unassuming. The kind of place where everyone waved from driveways and smiled over hedges but never asked real questions. It was Harold's favorite kind of place where politeness was a form of silence. But now I wanted to break that silence. I started with the Jacksons. They lived next door, sweet older couple, retired. Mrs. Jackson opened the door with a surprised smile when she saw me standing there with a tray of muffins. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise." We sat in her sunlit kitchen, sipping tea, her floral wallpaper curling at the edges. "How are you?" she asked. "You look a little pale." "I'm all right," I said. "Just cleaning out the house. You know, organizing old things. It's bringing up memories." She nodded solemnly. "That's understandable." I leaned in slightly. "Do you remember when Daniel was born?" Her smile faltered. "I'm sorry," she asked. "My youngest, Daniel. The one who passed away. Do you remember anything from that time?" She blinked, fumbled with her teacup. "Well, I suppose. It was so long ago. But you remember when I came home from the hospital, right?" She hesitated, then said carefully, "I remember seeing Harold outside a few times with a stroller. Just briefly. I assumed it was your little one, but then you told everyone he had died." I felt my breath hitch. "You saw him with a baby." She nodded. "Yes. Yes, I think I did. But Harold said the baby had complications. He said he didn't like to talk about it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were shaking in my lap. I just thought she paused, leaning forward. Margaret, is everything all right? No, I said softly, it's not. I stood, thanked her for the tea, and walked home without saying another word. I didn't stop there. I went to the Maples 3 houses down. To the old man who used to mow Harold's lawn when his back gave out. To the woman across the street who once babysat Lena when she was 5. Each conversation chipped away at a shell I hadn't known surrounded me. The old man said something that made my blood run cold. Your husband used to bring home these big grocery loads, canned food, bulk stuff. I thought maybe he was prepping for a storm or something, but it wasn't long after. The baby. Canned food, bulk supplies, for someone who supposedly didn't live with us anymore. Another woman mentioned strange noises she'd heard from our house years ago. Like a child crying, she said. I thought maybe it was one of your grandkids visiting, but it was always late at night, when the lights were out. I thanked them all and returned home, my legs weak, my ears ringing. They knew. They didn't know everything. But they had known something. And no one said a word. Because Harold had that effect on people. He had a way of presenting control that others mistook for safety. He was never violent in public, never raised his voice at church. People saw what he wanted them to see. But I was finally seeing something else. That night, after Harold fell asleep, I sat in the hallway outside the basement door again. I didn't knock. I just whispered. I'm here. I know you're there. I don't know what's happened to you. I don't even know your name. But I think you're my son. Silence. Then so faint I could barely make it out. Mom, I wept, quietly, into my hands. I leaned closer to the door and pressed my forehead against it. I'm going to get you out, I said. I promise. But promises meant nothing without a way to act. So the next morning, while Harold was still asleep, I went to the shed. He kept everything locked. His toolbox. His storage chest. But I remembered something, a spare key he'd once hidden inside an old jar of nails. I found it eventually. My hands trembled as I sorted through rusted screws and oily bolts. At the very bottom, it was there, a small silver key. I slipped it into my pocket, my heart pounding. Back inside, I waited. I moved slowly, pretending to dust sweeping what didn't need sweeping. I watched Harold through the corner of my eye. Waited until he grabbed his jacket and said he was headed into town. Waited until I heard the engine of his truck fade into nothing. Then I moved. I ran to the basement door, slid the key into the lock. Click! It turned. My breath caught. For a moment I hesitated. The hallway felt cold. Time froze. Then I opened the door. It creaked slow and loud. Dust swirled in the dim light. A wooden staircase led downward, steep and narrow. I took one step, then another. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered from a chain. And there, in the far corner, hunched beneath a threadbare blanket, was a figure, thin, dirty. His hair long and matted, his skin pale as porcelain. He flinched at the light. I stepped forward slowly. Daniel, I whispered. He turned his face toward me, sunken eyes, chapped lips. But behind them, something I recognized. He didn't speak, just stared. Then, barely audible, you came. I fell to my knees. 10 years of silence. 10 years of a mother who didn't know. 10 years of a life lost beneath the floorboards of my own home. I had found my son. And now, I had to fight to bring him back. He looked like a ghost, not of someone dead, but someone who'd been forgotten for so long the world had erased him. Daniel, my Daniel. He was curled in the corner of the room like a wounded animal. The basement wasn't as dark as I expected. Harold had kept a single bulb wired to a switch, and in that weak yellow light I could see everything. The stained mattress on the floor, the crate filled with old food cans, the toilet bucket in the corner. A small bookshelf with torn pages. A tattered blanket that barely covered his legs. It wasn't a dungeon. It was worse. It was a life reduced to survival, all beneath my feet every single day. I moved slowly toward him. I'm your mother, I whispered, not even sure if the words sounded real coming from me. He flinched, then blinked. His face twitched, but it wasn't fear. It was confusion, like the word mother didn't mean what it was supposed to anymore. Mom? He echoed, almost like testing it on his tongue. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't dare touch him. I didn't want to frighten him more than he already was. He was a grown man now, but he moved like a boy. His arms were thin, his hands trembling in his lap. His fingernails were too long. His lips were cracked. "How long have you been down here?" I asked gently. He looked up at me. I don't know." His voice was a scratch, a rusted hinge. "Did Daddy send you?" I froze. The word daddy came out with such childlike obedience it shattered something in me. "No," I said softly but firmly. "I came on my own." Daniel stared at me again, then looked away. "He said you knew. He said you didn't want me." My whole body went still. "What?" "He told me, when I cried for you. He said you told him to keep me down here, that I was too broken, that I couldn't go outside, that if I made noise, you'd be angry." My knees buckled. I sat down on the concrete floor, unable to hold myself up anymore. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know you were alive. He told me you died, Daniel. He said you were born with complications and you didn't make it." Daniel's hands clutched the sides of his head. He rocked slightly. "I didn't die," he whispered. "I know," I sobbed. "I know now. I'm so sorry. I'm so—" He flinched at my voice rising, so I lowered it again. "Everything he told you, it was a lie." He didn't speak. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with a decade of pain. Then slowly Daniel reached out and touched my knee just barely, like he was checking to see if I was real. I remember your voice," he whispered. "From when I was little. You used to sing." I nodded, smiling through my tears. "Yes, I used to sing to you at night. You loved lullabies." He closed his eyes for a moment. "I thought I dreamed that." "You didn't," I said. "You didn't dream any of it." I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't just leave him down there. I couldn't carry him out. He was weak, but still a grown man. And if Harold came home and saw— No, I couldn't let him come back here. I stood and said, "Daniel, I'm going to bring you something to eat, okay? And clean clothes. And I'll come back. I promise." He nodded slowly, but then panic crossed his face. "Don't tell him. He'll get mad." I crouched down again. "I won't let him hurt you, ever again." Upstairs, my hands were shaking as I prepared a tray. Soft bread, soup, water. I found one of Harold's old t-shirts and sweatpants. A towel. Every second felt like I was stealing time. When I returned to the basement, Daniel hadn't moved much. He took the food cautiously, his hands trembling. He didn't speak as he ate, but he glanced at me often, like he still wasn't sure I wasn't part of the lie. I didn't pressure him. I just sat beside him in silence. When he finished, he looked at the blanket on the bed. "You can sleep here," I said. "I'll leave the door open this time." His eyes widened in fear. "No, don't. He'll know." I exhaled. I didn't know how to explain that the real danger wasn't him being found, it was Harold not knowing I had found him. But Daniel was right about one thing. Harold couldn't suspect anything, not yet. That evening, I pretended everything was normal. Dinner was quiet. Harold talked about something he saw at the hardware store, a new tool chest. I nodded, smiled, poured wine. Acted like I was still the wife who believed all his stories. But inside, I was counting down the minutes until I could sneak back down again. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You've been different lately." I paused. "In what way?" "Just jumpy, distracted." "You're not snooping again, are you?" I forced a laugh. "I told you I was just cleaning." He studied me. "Stay out of the basement, Margaret. You don't want to see what's down there." "Oh, I know," I said with a smile. "It's just old junk and rats." He nodded, satisfied. But inside me, something had flipped. I no longer feared Harold's anger. I feared what would happen to Daniel if I didn't act soon. That night, after Harold fell asleep, I sat beside Daniel in the basement again. He asked me questions, this time about the world, about school, about time. He didn't know what year it was. He didn't know what a smartphone was. He didn't know Lena had moved out. "Is Carl still here?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "No," I said. "He moved to New York. He's married now." Daniel looked down. I missed everything. I reached for his hand and held it gently. But you're still here. And I found you. That's what matters now. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hope. The days that followed were a blur of secrets and stolen moments. I moved like a shadow in my own home, keeping one ear open for Harold's boots on the floorboards, one hand always near the key I now wore on a string beneath my blouse. Every night when Harold fell asleep in his recliner or collapsed into bed after his third bourbon, I slipped downstairs. To see Daniel. To sit beside him, feed him, talk to him, relearn him. He was growing stronger by the day, though, slowly. I started bringing him fresh food, real meals, not the canned garbage Harold had probably kept him on. Chicken and rice, oatmeal with honey, fresh fruit cut small so he could chew. His stomach couldn't handle much at once, but the gratitude in his eyes with each bite undid me. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just sat. Sometimes I'd hum to fill the silence and he'd close his eyes as if remembering lullabies from a dream he wasn't sure he ever had. But during the day, I had to pretend, to keep the routine, to live beside Harold without choking on every lie I smiled through. I don't know how I didn't explode. Then one night the power went out. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I had just brought Daniel a warm blanket and half a sandwich. The lights flickered once, then darkness swallowed the house whole. Daniel whimpered in the dark, panicked. Shh, I whispered, reaching for my phone and turning on the flashlight. It's okay. It's just the power. Stay calm. I held the phone between us, the light casting long, trembling shadows across his face. He was breathing fast, his chest rising and falling like a trapped animal. I crouched and took both his hands in mine. I'm here, I said softly. I'm not leaving. Gradually his breathing slowed. But then I heard it, the front door creaking open. Harold was home. Early. I had miscalculated. He must have cut his trip short. Or worse, had suspected something. I froze. My mind raced. I had to get back upstairs before he noticed. But I couldn't leave Daniel in complete darkness, not again. I opened the small closet in the basement and pulled out the emergency lantern Harold kept there. I switched it on and placed it near Daniel. I'll be back, I whispered. No matter what, stay here. Don't make a sound. He nodded, eyes wide in the lantern light. I crept back upstairs and closed the basement door quietly behind me. I had barely made it to the hallway when Harold's voice called out from the kitchen. Margaret, you up? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. The power went out. I was just grabbing candles. I stepped into the kitchen, and there he was, soaked from the rain, his boots tracking mud, his expression unreadable. You okay? He asked. I nodded, just a bit startled. He tossed his keys on the counter, and for one awful second I thought he might ask me why one was missing, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at me and said, You sure you weren't? Looking around again. I forced a smile. Harold, I'm just trying to get through the night like you. He stared at me long and slow, then shrugged. Well? Candles are in the hutch, right? Right, I said, already walking toward them. We went to bed in silence. I didn't sleep a second. The storm outside raged through the night, but the real storm was sitting just inches away from me, snoring in my bed, breathing evenly, dreaming God knows what. And beneath us, our son, was shivering under a blanket I should have tucked him in with 10 years ago. In the morning, I called the electric company and learned the outage was caused by a downed tree. It was being fixed, but it would take hours. I saw it as a gift. It meant Harold would likely head into town again to avoid the inconvenience. And when he did, I acted fast. I brought Daniel upstairs. His eyes squinted painfully at the light filtering through the windows. His legs were weak. He could barely walk on his own, not after 10 years in the dark with barely enough room to stretch. I supported him with one arm around his back and led him to the guest room. His eyes darted around like a child seeing the world for the first time. Is this my room? He whispered. No, I said, but it's yours now. He touched the bedspread like it was treasure. He ran his fingers over the windowsill, the curtain, the lamp. I left him there while I fetched warm water, clean towels, and a change of clothes. When I returned, he had fallen asleep, curled up like a boy, one hand clutching the pillow. I knelt beside the bed and stroked his hair. It was matted, greasy, in desperate need of washing. But it was his. The same soft brown that used to curl behind his ears when he was a baby. I whispered, "I'll fix this. I'll fix all of it." But that afternoon, Harold came home early again. Too early. I had just finished washing Daniel's hair in the bathroom when I heard the truck in the driveway. Panic surged through me. I dried Daniel's head quickly, rushed him back into the guest room, and shut the door. "Don't make a sound," I whispered. "No matter what. Just stay still." Then I walked out calmly, as if nothing was wrong. Harold stomped into the house, his face grim. "I saw muddy footprints on the porch," he said. I blinked. "Probably yours?" "It rained all night." He didn't respond. He just walked past me toward the guest room hallway. "Wait." He stopped, looked at me. "What is it?" I hesitated, then said, "I was going to surprise you. I thought I'd clean out the guest room. Maybe finally redecorate it for the holidays." Harold stared at the door. "I haven't opened that room in years." "I know," I said. "That's why it needs a refresh." Another pause. He nodded, slowly. "Well," he said, backing away, "if you want to waste time on that, go ahead." He turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I exhaled, shaky, shallow, terrified. Daniel was safe, for now. But Harold's suspicion was growing. I was running out of time. It was clear now I couldn't wait much longer. Harold was watching me too closely. His instincts were sharper than I'd given him credit for. And if he caught even a glimpse of Daniel, I knew what he'd do. He'd drag him back down there. Or worse. I had to move fast, but I needed help. And I knew exactly where to start. The journal. It happened by accident. I was searching the hallway closet for spare blankets when I noticed something strange. The back panel didn't look right. It had been nailed in unevenly, and the wood didn't match the other boards. I pulled at it with the edge of a hammer until it loosened and came off. Behind it, tucked in the wall's hollow cavity, was a small cloth-covered notebook. Dusty. Fragile. The pages yellowed. I opened it and immediately saw the handwriting. Childish, uneven. "My name is Daniel." I sat down right there on the floor, heart pounding. The entries were dated only by year. The first one started with, "Daddy says I'm not like the others. He says I have to stay in my special room." I kept reading. Page after page of thoughts, some hopeful, some terrified. I heard a girl singing upstairs. "Maybe it's my sister. I miss Mommy. I think about her face, but it's getting fuzzy. I was bad today. I tried to go up the stairs. Daddy yelled and made me sleep without dinner. I couldn't breathe." This wasn't just proof. This was a confession in a child's hand. 10 years' worth of memories hidden in a wall. Toward the end, the entries got darker. "I don't talk much now. My bones hurt. My teeth feel loose. I had a dream I lived in the sky." Then the last entry, a single sentence. "She'll never come for me." I clutched the book to my chest and wept. Because he was wrong. I had come, and I was never going to let him go again. I drove to the library parking lot, notebook tucked in my bag, and dialed Lena's number. She answered on the second ring. "Mom." Her voice was cautious, wary. "I need you," I said, trying to stay composed. "Please. It's about your brother." Silence. Then Carl. "No," I whispered. "Daniel." Lena came that evening. I told Harold I needed to catch up with her, and that we'd be sitting out on the porch for a girls' talk. He grunted in that dismissive way of his, and didn't ask questions. He'd always seen Lena as soft, emotional someone to be coddled, not taken seriously. That worked in our favor. We sat outside under the porch light, and I told her everything. She didn't believe me at first. Who would? But when I placed the notebook in her hands and let her read Daniel's words, her face crumpled. "I remember him," she whispered. I thought I made him up." "You didn't," I said. "He's real. And he's alive." She looked up at me, tears brimming. "Where is he?" "In the guest room," she gasped. "I got him out of the basement 2 days ago." "Oh my God!" "We need help, Lena. I can't do this alone anymore." She nodded. Her voice trembled. "We'll call someone." That night, after Harold went to bed, Lena sat with Daniel. They didn't talk much. They just looked at each other. Then gently, Daniel reached out and touched her hand. And Lena, bless her, didn't pull away. She just whispered, "I remember your laugh. When you were a baby. You sounded like a squeaky toy." Daniel smiled. Just a little. The first I'd seen. The next day, Lena made the call. Adult Protective Services. Anonymous tip. And then quietly we prepared for what had to happen next. But Harold wasn't done yet. That evening, after dinner, he stood in the living room doorway and said, "I know you're hiding something." I looked up from the couch. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Margaret." His voice was calm, but underneath it was that cold fire I'd grown too used to, the one he used to discipline kids when he taught, the one that made grown men shrink. "You've been distracted. You've been whispering on the phone. You're sneaking around." I didn't speak. "I'm warning you," he said, stepping forward. "Whatever you think you're doing, stop. Now." That's when Lena stepped in. She came out of the hallway, phone in hand, and said, "Too late, Dad. They're already on their way." Harold froze. His eyes darted between us, and for the first time I saw fear in him. Real fear. He turned to me. "You called them?" "No," I said quietly. "We did." He lunged, but Lena stepped between us, holding up the phone. "Touch her, and I swear I'll scream loud enough for the neighbors to hear everything." He stopped. Just as headlights flashed outside the window, two officers came in, calm, professional. They asked questions, checked IDs. Then one of them looked at Harold and said, "We've received a serious allegation about the welfare of a dependent individual. We're going to need access to all parts of the home." Harold laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "There's nothing here but my wife and daughter." But Lena had already opened the guest room door. Daniel stood behind it, blanket draped over his shoulders, blinking into the light. And the moment one officer saw him, everything changed. They separated us, took statements, photographed the notebook. Harold shouted, swore, claimed Daniel was dangerous, mentally unstable, violent, that he had kept him hidden to protect us. But his words didn't land. Not anymore. Because Daniel had a name. He had a voice. And he had a mother who wouldn't let him be silenced again. They took Harold away in handcuffs. He didn't struggle. Not at first. He stared at me with this mixture of contempt and pity, as if I had ruined everything. As if the crime wasn't his, but mine, for dragging it into the light. "You'll regret this," he said. "You don't know what you've done." But I did. I'd saved my son. Daniel was seated on the living room couch, wrapped in a fleece blanket. One of the officers had gently offered him a juice box like he was a scared child, and honestly, that's what he looked like in that moment. A boy too small for his years. Lena sat next to him, holding his hand. Her thumb rubbed over his knuckles, soothing, protective. She didn't flinch when he gripped too tight out of fear. The house buzzed with officials, photos being taken, forms filled out, statements recorded. A woman from Adult Protective Services gently pulled me aside. "Mrs. Ellison," she said softly, "I want you to know what you did today. Saved a life." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat was raw with unshed emotion. "Your son will need medical evaluation," she continued. "Psychological support, long-term care. This kind of isolation causes damage that doesn't just go away with time. But he has something now that he didn't before." "What's that?" I whispered. "An advocate, a mother who sees him." Daniel was taken to the hospital that night. They had to move quickly. He was malnourished, vitamin deficient, and had signs of long-term muscle atrophy. I rode in the ambulance with him. I sat beside the stretcher, holding his hand the entire time. He didn't speak much, just stared at the ceiling, the lights above him reflecting in his eyes like he was seeing a spaceship. At one point, I leaned in and whispered, "We're going to fix this. You hear me? You're safe now." His hand twitched in mine. "I'm not broken?" he asked. "No," I said. "You were never broken. You were just hidden." The hospital days blurred into each other. Tests, IVs, neurological evaluations, psychiatric interviews. He flinched at loud sounds, avoided mirrors. He didn't like to be left alone for long. Nurses said he had something like institutionalization, the kind of psychological state seen in long-term prisoners or survivors of captivity. He startled easily, panicked when doors closed. But he always relaxed when I entered the room. The first time he let me hug him, really hug him, was on the third night. I had just finished singing an old lullaby one I used to hum when he was a baby. I wasn't even sure he remembered it, but the moment I finished, he reached out and put his arms around me. "Do you still love me?" he asked. I held him tighter. "More than ever," I whispered. "I always did. I just didn't know where to find you." Meanwhile, Harold was denying everything. He told the police that Daniel had violent episodes as a child, that I had refused to deal with it, and that he had made a sacrifice to protect the family. He would have hurt someone, he said in one recorded interview. I kept him alive, didn't I? As if feeding a child through a locked door justified erasing him from the world. As if robbing him of a childhood of love, of light, of freedom was mercy. I was asked to testify. At first I was afraid. Not of Harold, not anymore, but of standing in front of strangers and admitting what I hadn't seen, what I hadn't done. I thought the shame would swallow me. But then I remembered Daniel's voice. He said, "You didn't want me." I couldn't let that be the last word. In court, I told the truth. I spoke about the night I heard the whisper, about the scratches on the floor, the hidden notebook, the neighbor's silence, the decades of control Harold had exerted over our family, the fear, the manipulation, the image he so carefully curated. I didn't hold back. I looked Harold in the eye and said, "You didn't just lock him in the basement. You locked me in a marriage where I wasn't allowed to question you. And now I see everything." He didn't flinch. He just stared. For once, I didn't care what he thought. Harold was convicted of felony child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and psychological torture. He received a 25-year sentence. I didn't attend his sentencing. I was with Daniel that day, helping him walk outside for the first time on his own 2 feet. He stood in the hospital garden, pale sunlight brushing his face. His skin looked too fragile for the air, but he smiled. "It smells green," he said. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "That's grass, baby." He looked at me. "Do I have a future?" "Yes," I said, "starting now." The first few weeks after the trial felt like waking from a long nightmare, only to find that reality had been permanently changed. Daniel was placed in a recovery center with trauma specialists. The doctors said he needed time in a controlled environment, not just physically, but psychologically. 10 years in captivity had stunted not only his body, but his understanding of the world. He was 23 on paper, but emotionally, he was somewhere between a frightened 10-year-old and a wary teenager. The center was kind, quiet. They let me visit as often as I wanted. Lena came too sometimes, just to sit in the corner and read, while Daniel watched her from the safety of his favorite armchair. He still didn't like loud noises. Sudden movements made him freeze, but he'd begun speaking in longer sentences, asking questions. "What's the internet? Is school fun? Do people still ride bikes?" I answered everything, even when it hurt. He asked once if we had a funeral for him. I told him no, just a quiet grieving, and he nodded as if that made sense. "You do," I said. "May 10th. He smiled. "I want a cake someday." "You'll have the biggest one, I promised." I found myself starting over too. The house was too big, too full of shadows. Every room reminded me of what I hadn't seen. Every door creaked like a memory. So I left. I sold the property. The realtor was surprised it sold so quickly. I wasn't. Evil doesn't leave blood on the walls. It hides behind freshly painted trim and quiet neighborhoods. Lena and I pooled what we had. We rented a small house close to the recovery center. Nothing special, just enough for me, a spare room for Daniel once he was ready, and a porch that got the morning sun. Every morning I sat on that porch with a cup of tea and thought, this is what truth feels like. Quiet, honest, not easy, but real. Daniel took his first steps outside the center a month later. It was to a small diner, nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. He chose the window seat. He didn't talk much, but he looked out the window the entire time, watching cars go by, as if he were watching stars move through a galaxy. Afterward, he said, "I didn't know food could taste good when you're not scared." That night, I cried in my car. His physical therapy continued. So did the counseling. Some days were good. Some days he shut down completely. He had nightmares. He sometimes forgot how old he was, and more than once he asked if Harold would come back. No, I said every time. He's gone, and he will never touch you again. Daniel always nodded, but his eyes never fully believed it, not yet. One afternoon we sat in the park together. Just us. He was quieter than usual. I thought maybe he was tired. Then he said something that stunned me. "Why didn't you come sooner?" I froze. He wasn't angry, he was just curious. Like a boy asking about a bedtime story. I couldn't lie to him. "I didn't know," I said. "I believed what your father told me. I thought you died." He looked down at his shoes, scuffed white sneakers the hospital had given him. But I called out. I screamed. "You never heard me." I swallowed hard. I wish I had. I think maybe I did. But I told myself it was nothing. I believed your father because that's what I always did. "I'm so sorry." He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I forgive you." My heart broke and healed all at once. Lena started organizing paperwork for Daniel's Social Security medical records, reinstating his identity. She joked about needing a welcome back to the world party. Daniel laughed, a dry, rusty laugh, but real. He asked if he could go to school someday. I told him yes. He asked if he'd ever be able to drive a car. I said absolutely. He asked if he was weird. I said you're rare, and brave, and more human than most people I know. He smiled and said, "That sounds like something a mom would say." "I am your mom," I said, "and I'm never going to forget that again." The last time I saw Harold was during a scheduled parole hearing he requested after 8 months in prison. I didn't attend in person, but they sent me the transcript. In it, Harold claimed he'd acted out of desperation, that Daniel had been too difficult for a normal life, and that he hadn't known what else to do. The board denied him immediately. It turns out that even people trained to remain neutral can spot a monster hiding behind a suit. That night, back at the house, Daniel asked me if we could take a photo together. Our first. I dressed in my best sweater. He put on the plaid shirt Lena had picked out for him. We stood on the porch. The sun was setting behind us. Lena took the picture. And when I saw it later, Daniel's fragile smile, my hand on his shoulder, I thought, we look like a mother and son starting over. Because that's what we were. The seasons changed. Summer bled into fall, and with it came the slow, quiet rebuilding of our lives. Daniel moved in with me in early October. The doctors said it was time he had stabilized enough emotionally, and the therapists believed the comfort of a family home could do more good than harm as long as we had regular check-ins. I agreed, of course. I wanted him home. I needed him home. But I won't lie, I was scared too. Not of him, of the weight of responsibility, of doing it wrong, of failing him again. But the first night under the same roof, he fell asleep on the couch with a blanket wrapped around him, his head resting on my lap. I ran my fingers through his clean hair, short now freshly cut, and I knew I could do this. I would. We started a new rhythm. Mornings were slow. Oatmeal tea, sometimes eggs if he felt up to it. He liked quiet music, gentle guitar, old lullabies. Lena made playlists for him and taught him how to use a tablet. He learned to swipe, to play videos, to read articles. It was like watching a toddler grow into a teenager in real time, except it happened in a man's body with a man's haunted eyes. He asked questions constantly. Why do people vote? What's a meme? Do dogs dream? I answered all of them. When I didn't know, we looked it up together. One day he asked, do I have to forgive him? He didn't say Harold's name, but we both knew who he meant. I didn't push. That's your choice, I said. Forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, not even him. He was quiet for a while, then said, I don't think I ever will. That's okay. I don't want to be angry forever, he added, but I don't want to lie to myself either. I nodded. That makes you stronger than you think. We began therapy together. Joint sessions guided by a woman named Angela, calm voice, warm eyes, never rushed. She helped us talk about things we hadn't been able to say. The shame I carried, the self-blame, my years of silence. Daniel opened up about the dreams he still had of being back in the basement, of hearing my voice upstairs but being unable to scream loud enough. I kept thinking if I could just say your name, he whispered in one session you'd come. I cried, hard, right there on the couch. I'm here now, I said, and I'm not leaving. He reached for my hand. Halloween came. Daniel didn't want to go out. He said costumes and masks made him nervous, but he sat by the window and watched the children in their little outfits. One dressed as a ghost waved at him. Daniel waved back. Later, he told me he wanted to carve a pumpkin next year. That was the first time he used the words next year. He asked about Carl eventually. It was awkward. Carl and I had barely spoken since the trial. He'd called me once shortly after Harold's arrest asking what was going on. When I told him, he was quiet. Said he needed time. And then, nothing. Daniel said, "Does he know I'm alive?" "Yes," I said, "but he hasn't come to see you." Daniel didn't seem angry. Just disappointed. "Maybe he doesn't believe it," he said. "Maybe I'm too hard to look at." I shook my head. "You're not hard to look at, Daniel. You're a miracle." Still, I could see the hope draining from his eyes, and that hurt worse than any silence. Then one day there was a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Inside a short note. "I didn't know. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I need time to figure out how to face you. But I will. I promise. Carl." Daniel read it 3 times, then folded it and placed it in the drawer by his bed. He remembers he said simply, "That's enough. For now." Winter crept in. The nights got longer. Daniel got stronger. He started helping me cook just simple things. He liked peeling carrots, arranging slices of fruit, stirring soup. We burned one meal so badly the fire alarm went off, and we both laughed so hard we cried. He was getting used to light, to warmth, to laughter, to being. One morning he said, "Can I go outside on my own?" I paused. "Where do you want to go?" "Just the end of the street. I want to see what the world feels like without someone next to me." I said yes. He bundled up in a coat and gloves, walked to the end of the block. I stood at the window, heart racing. He stood there for 5 minutes, then walked back. When he came in, he said it didn't swallow me, it just was. And I cried again. Because this was healing. Not fast, not easy, but real. That night before bed, I asked him, "Do you remember who you were before all of this?" Daniel thought for a long time. "No," he said, "but I'm starting to see who I am now." I smiled. "And who's that?" He looked at me. "Someone who survived. Someone who's still becoming." Christmas came, and for the first time in over a decade, our home felt like it belonged to us. Not to secrets, not to silence, not to fear. Daniel helped me decorate the tree. He was fascinated by the ornaments, especially the handmade ones from when Lena and Carl were little. He turned one over in his hands, a painted clay star with "Carl, 3rd grade," scrawled across the back. He didn't say anything, just hung it gently near the bottom, stepped back, and looked at the lights like they were magic. Later, he whispered, "I never thought I'd see a Christmas tree again." I swallowed hard. There'll be many more. And that night, I wrapped presents for him: socks, a new hoodie, a set of notebooks, and a small digital camera. I labeled each one, "To Daniel, with love." I couldn't give him back 10 lost Christmases, but I could start now. On Christmas morning, Lena came over with cinnamon rolls and a carefully wrapped box that held a journal with a leather cover. Inside, she'd already written on the first page, "This belongs to Daniel Ellison, the boy who never disappeared, and the man who's still writing his story." Daniel smiled and hugged her tight. I saw Lena's eyes fill. She didn't wipe them away. That afternoon, we sat by the fire, and Daniel asked, "Do you remember what I looked like as a baby?" "I do," I said, smiling. "You had the tiniest hands, and your eyes were always open like you were watching the world even when you couldn't make sense of it." "I wish I remembered that." "You will," I said. "In pieces. And we'll make new memories, too." Then he asked something I didn't expect. "Can I change my last name?" I blinked. "Why?" He looked down, thoughtful. "Because I don't want to carry his name anymore." I nodded slowly. "You don't have to explain it to me, sweetheart. When you're ready, we'll do whatever you want." He looked at me. "Can I take yours?" "Just yours." My heart clenched. "You always had mine, Daniel. Always." January brought new challenges. Daniel had his first panic attack in public. We were in a grocery store and someone dropped a glass bottle in the next aisle. The shatter echoed too loud, too sudden. He froze. His breath shortened. His hands started shaking. I rushed to him, pulled him close, whispered, "You're safe. You're with me. No one's going to hurt you." It took 10 minutes before he could stand again. Afterward, he apologized a dozen times. I kept saying the same thing: you have nothing to be sorry for. Because trauma doesn't leave quietly. It claws. It returns in waves. But he faced it. And he got through it. That's what mattered. In early February, we got a letter from the court. A formal update on Harold. His appeal had been denied again. Daniel didn't want to read it, but he asked me to summarize. I said he'll be in prison for a long time. Daniel just nodded. "He doesn't matter anymore," he said. "Not to this life." And that's when I knew he was ready to reclaim his future. He started drawing. It began with rough sketches, trees, clouds, windows. Then he started sketching faces, always from memory. He even drew me once holding a cup of tea staring out the window. He apologized that it wasn't perfect, but to me, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. One day, he showed me a page with a drawing of a closed door, heavy wooden with a lock in the center. Then he handed me a pencil. "Draw the key," he said. So I did. And we hung it on the fridge. Because art wasn't just creativity. It was proof: I see you. You exist. We are free. On the anniversary of the day I opened the basement door, Daniel surprised me. He stood in the kitchen holding a small box wrapped in newspaper and twine. "What's this?" I asked. He smiled. "Your own journal. So you don't forget this life." I opened it. On the inside cover, he'd written, "To my mom, you saved me. Now I get to live. And so do you." I cried openly, fully, and he hugged me while I shook. That night, I sat alone and wrote my first entry. I wrote about the sound of Daniel's voice. I wrote about the creak of the basement stairs. I wrote about my guilt, my rage, my redemption. And then I wrote this. Sometimes we don't realize we're living on top of our worst fear. But courage isn't loud. It's a whisper, a footstep, a knock on a door we were told never to open. I opened mine, and I found my son. Not broken, just waiting to be seen. They say trauma changes the brain, that it rewires memory, distorts time. Living with Daniel was like living inside a house being rebuilt from the inside out. Some walls were strong, others crumbled under the weight of a single word. One memory could bring laughter, another silence. But the house stood. Day by day it stood. We celebrated Daniel's 24th birthday in April. It was his first real birthday party. He asked for lemon cake just like the one Lena used to bake as a teenager. We invited a few of the therapists, a social worker, one of the nurses who'd become a friend. Carl didn't come, but he sent a card, handwritten. "Happy birthday, little brother. I want to know you again. I just don't know how to start. But I'm trying. Please don't give up on me." Daniel read it in silence, then folded it carefully and said, "That's enough. For now." One morning, I woke to find him on the porch staring out at the sunrise. He was sketching. "Whatcha drawing?" I asked. He held it up. It was our house. Simple, crooked roof. The garden patch. A figure on the porch with a teacup me. Another figure just inside the door him. But beneath the house he'd drawn roots. Thick ones. Tangled. Some cracked. Some twisted into fists. I asked, "Are those roots or scars?" He smiled. "Both." In therapy, he'd begun to talk about Harold more openly. "I used to wait for his footsteps," he said once. "Every sound meant something. Food, yelling. Silence was the worst." Angela, our therapist, asked gently, "What do you believe about him now?" Daniel thought for a long time, then said, "He was broken. But that doesn't make what he did forgivable." Angela nodded. "And you?" Daniel looked at me. "I'm healing, but I still feel like I lost who I was supposed to be." I took his hand. "You're becoming who you were meant to be," I said. "That's not a loss. That's a beginning." He started volunteering at the local library, just shelving books, filing returns. But he came home glowing, not from the work, but from the freedom. the normalcy. People greeted him by name. Children passed him without fear. No locks. No shadows. One day he brought home a book of poetry and read a line to me. Even a broken compass finds north when held by steady hands. He closed the book and said, "You're my compass." Carl finally visited in June. He stood on the porch like he didn't know how to breathe. I opened the door slowly. His face had aged stress-guilt distance, but beneath it the boy I once held was still there. "Can I see him?" he asked. I didn't answer. I stepped aside. Daniel was in the living room drawing. He looked up. Carl froze. Daniel stood. For a moment no one moved. Then Daniel walked over, stopped just in front of him, and said, "You're taller than I remember." Carl choked on a laugh. "You're alive." Daniel nodded. "I am." Then, to my astonishment, he opened his arms, and Carl stepped into them. They held each other for a long time. I had to walk out of the room just to breathe. That night, the three of us sat on the porch. Carl apologized, not in dramatic words, but in small ones, honest ones. I didn't know, he said. And then when I did, I didn't know how to face it. I thought I'd make it worse. "You didn't," Daniel said. "But you can help make it better." Carl looked at me. "How do we do that?" I smiled. "Together." The next morning, Daniel asked me something I didn't expect. "Can we go see the house?" I blinked. "The old one." He nodded. "I want to stand outside it. Just once. I need to see that it's real." I didn't want to. Every bone in my body resisted the idea. But this wasn't about me. So we drove. It had been sold. The new owners were away. The porch had been repainted. The shutters cleaned. The yard looked manicured. But Daniel didn't look at the flowers. He stared at the foundation. He stepped onto the porch slowly, then down into the side yard to the spot where the basement window used to be. It had been bricked over. He touched the wall. "I remember this crack," he whispered. "I used to trace it with my finger while I waited." I stood beside him in silence. Then he turned and said, "I don't need to go inside. This is enough." And we left. On the drive home, he said, "Can we stop for ice cream?" We did. "Then this," I said, "is your first." He smiled and took a bite. That night, he sat at the table writing in his journal. I peeked over his shoulder. He wrote, "10 years underground. Now I live above the roots. I breathe the air. I laugh. I walk in the sun. And I am not alone." Daniel's recovery wasn't a straight line. It was a mosaic. Some days sparkled with progress. Others felt like shattered glass, but he kept showing up for his life. And so did I. We joined a local trauma survivors group that met every Wednesday evening in a quiet church basement. The irony of being back in a basement wasn't lost on either of us. The first time we walked in, Daniel's hand tightened around mine like a reflex. "You okay?" I whispered. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "I have to reclaim places like this." And he did. Week by week, Daniel began to speak in front of the group, not with rehearsed speeches or polished stories, but with raw truth. "My name is Daniel. I was kept in a basement for 10 years by my own father. I'm still learning how to live in daylight." One woman cried. A man with burn scars hugged him after. Another survivor whispered, "You're a miracle." Daniel didn't see it yet, but I did. In July, he asked if he could legally change his name. He didn't want to carry Harold's surname anymore. He wanted to be Daniel Monroe. Monroe was my maiden name. "I want to belong to something good," he said. "And you were the first good thing I had." We stood before a judge, hands linked, and watched her sign the papers. Daniel Monroe. It felt like birth. Not rebirth, but something brand new. That same month, we planted a garden together. A small one, cucumbers, tomatoes, a few herbs. He loved getting his hands dirty, watching the soil move under his fingers. Each sprout that broke through the earth made him smile like a child seeing fireworks. "It's weird," he said one morning, watering the basil, "watching something grow right in front of you." "It's not weird," I said. "It's a gift." He tilted his head. "I guess I'm a late bloomer." We both laughed. He started writing too. Not just in his journal, but actual short stories. Flash fiction memoir fragments. He submitted one to a small online magazine, a story about a boy in a locked room who dreamed of the stars. They published it. When he saw his name in print, Daniel Monroe, he just stared at the screen for a long time. "This means I exist, right?" he asked. I touched his shoulder. "You always did. Now the world knows." Carl began visiting more regularly. Slowly, the brothers started repairing what time and silence had broken. They played board games, watched movies, made terrible sandwiches together in the kitchen. One afternoon, I found them arguing over whether cats or dogs made better companions. Carl laughed and said, "Man, I really missed having you around." Daniel smiled. "That makes one of us." They both burst out laughing. It was the kind of brotherly teasing that would have seemed mundane if it hadn't felt so sacred. Lena hosted a small barbecue that August. Just a few close friends, the therapists who'd supported us, some neighbors who had learned the truth and offered help. Daniel grilled veggie skewers while people shared stories under twinkling backyard lights. At one point, someone asked Daniel what he wanted to do next. He said without hesitation, "I want to help people who were like me, forgotten, hidden. I want to be the person who knocks on the locked door." There was a pause, then applause. Someone raised a glass and said, "To Daniel Monroe, the boy who walked out of darkness and chose to light the way." Later that night, I found him sitting alone beneath the porch light. "I keep waiting to feel finished," he said, "like I'm healed. But I still have hard days." I sat beside him. "Finished isn't the goal," I said. "Living is." He nodded. Then quietly, "I used to think if I ever got out, I'd never trust anyone again. But now, I trust you." I couldn't speak. I just placed my hand over his. "You were the first face I saw after the dark," he whispered. "You're my proof that the world isn't all cruelty." I kissed his forehead. "And you're my proof that love doesn't die even when it's buried." On the day he officially graduated from his therapy program, he wore a button-down shirt, combed his hair, and smiled for photos. Angela, our therapist, gave him a certificate and said, "This doesn't mean you're done. It means you're ready." He nodded. "I know. I'm just getting started." It was early autumn when Daniel asked me if I wanted to walk with him through the woods behind our new house. "I've never walked in a forest before," he said. "Not really. I've seen them in books. And in dreams." We packed a thermos of tea and some apples. The path was simple, winding through soft earth and dappled light, quiet and alive, in the way nature always is when it's not trying to impress you. At one point, he stopped and touched the bark of a maple tree. He closed his eyes. "It's alive," he whispered. "I know that sounds dumb." "No," I said, watching him gently press his palm against the rough surface. "It sounds like someone who understands what being alive really means." Daniel started attending community college classes that fall: creative writing, art therapy, psychology. He came home every day brimming with ideas, his notebook filled with underlined passages and tiny sketches. One day, I found a short paragraph scribbled in the corner of a page. "I am not what was done to me. I am what I do next." I stuck it to the fridge. He didn't say anything when he saw it. He just smiled. In therapy, he began confronting the pieces of himself he'd locked away. His anger, his shame, his guilt. "I hate that I waited for him to feed me," he admitted once. "I hate that I still sometimes flinch when the doorbell rings, like I expect a lock to click." Angela said, "Your body learned those things to survive. That's not weakness, that's brilliance." Daniel wiped his eyes. "I want to unlearn them." "You will," she said, "bit by bit." And he did. Every day. In how he opened windows. In how he answered the door. In how he laughed out loud at bad puns or held eye contact a little longer with people he trusted. He was building himself, one safe moment at a time. We framed his first published story. He hung it above his desk. Then he submitted another. And another. People started writing to him, survivors of abuse, young writers, former foster kids. He read every email. He wrote back to many. He told me, "I used to think my voice didn't matter. Now I know it's one of the only things that can make a difference." Lena and I watched him transform. He cooked dinner twice a week now, grilled vegetables, creamy pastas, the occasional experimental stir-fry that sometimes ended in smoke alarms and laughter. He'd take long walks sometimes, stopping to sketch birds or flowers. He started wearing headphones not to block the world out but to accompany it with music. He began tutoring kids at the local learning center just a few hours a week. He said he liked showing others how to tell their stories. "They don't know what I've been through," he said once. "But I can still teach them how to be heard. That's enough." One afternoon, I walked into the living room and saw him standing at the mirror, not brushing his hair or adjusting his clothes. Just looking. Not in shame. Not in fear. Just looking. I stood quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. After a long pause, he turned to me and said, "I used to wonder if I was real." I walked over and put my hand on his back. "You're the most real thing I've ever known." He leaned his head on my shoulder. In late November, he asked if we could visit Harold's prison. I didn't answer right away. My chest tightened. But then I asked, "Are you sure?" "I don't want to forgive him," Daniel said. "But I want to face him. I want him to see that I lived, that I'm free, that he didn't win." I swallowed hard. "If you're ready, I'll be there with you." He shook his head gently. "No, this one's mine." The visit was scheduled. He went alone. When he returned, he was pale but calm. We sat on the porch. I waited. Finally, he said he looked older, smaller. I thought I'd feel rage, but all I felt was pity. I reached for his hand. "What did you say to him?" Daniel looked out across the yard. The leaves were falling orange and red. I said, "You don't get to define me anymore." Then I left. He exhaled, slowly. "I feel lighter." That night, he read me a new poem. It ended like this: "They said I was broken, but broken things don't grow back. And here I am, taller than the door they locked me behind, brighter than the lies they fed me, more alive than the silence they buried me in." He looked up. "Too much?" "No," I whispered. "It's perfect." Because it was. Because he was. The first snow came early that December. Daniel opened the front door just as the flakes began falling soft and steady, like the sky itself was letting go of something. He stood on the porch in his thick sweater arms folded, watching the world turn white. He turned to me and smiled. "It's quiet, but not the scary kind." I stepped out beside him, watching the snow land on his hair, his eyelashes. "This is the kind of quiet you choose," I said. "Not the kind forced on you." He nodded. "Yeah, that's the difference." It had been a full year since I opened the basement door. 12 months since I unlatched a lock I never thought to question. 12 months since I looked into the eyes of a boy I was told had died and saw life flickering, fragile but fierce. We had come so far. But healing isn't a straight path, and it never truly ends. Daniel still had bad days. There were still sounds that triggered him. Mornings where he didn't speak. Nights where the nightmares curled in around the edges of his dreams. But now he had tools, and more importantly, he had us. We sat at the dining room table, hot tea between us, quiet music in the background. He was writing in his notebook, not hunched or hurried, just comfortable. I said, "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if none of it had happened?" He paused, thought. "Sometimes," he said, "but I try not to live there. I can't change what was stolen, but I can protect what I have now." Then he looked at me, clear-eyed, steady. "You gave me that. You brought me back." I shook my head, voice trembling. "No, Daniel. You brought yourself back. I just opened the door." He reached across the table and held my hand. That was everything. I think about that moment often. The simplicity of it. The depth of it. The reminder that redemption doesn't come all at once. It unfolds slowly over coffee cups and whispered reassurances. Over cold mornings and messy dinners. Over therapy sessions and missed calls and awkward hugs that eventually feel natural. It's not dramatic. It's earned. We got family photos taken that month. Lena, Carl, Daniel, me. At first, Daniel didn't know where to stand. The photographer asked, "You want to be in the middle?" Daniel looked at us. At the camera. At the winter sky behind us. "No," he said, smiling. "I want to be beside everyone. I like seeing the edges." We all laughed. The flash went off. Later, when we looked at the photos, he said, "I don't look like a prisoner anymore." I said, "That's because you're not. You're home." Now, as I sit here finishing this story, our story, I look around our little home and see traces of him everywhere. His boots by the door, his sketchbook on the couch, his laughter echoing down the hall. A boy who was buried beneath a lie for 10 years, now a man walking toward his future, one brave step at a time. He may never fully reclaim what was taken, but he's built something new, and so have I. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty for not knowing, and I do. I won't pretend I don't. I spent a decade walking above the truth, laughing while my child cried, sleeping while he whispered my name. But guilt is not the same as failure. I failed when I stopped listening to my instincts, but I rose when I started again. And I'll never stop listening now. If you're hearing this and you've ignored that quiet voice in your gut, don't. If something feels off, investigate. If someone tells you not to look behind the door, look anyway. Because the truth doesn't hide forever. It waits. Patiently. Quietly. Until someone brave enough says, I see you. Thank you for listening. If you've ever carried guilt, if you've ever been silenced, if you've ever opened a door and changed someone's life or wished you had, please subscribe to Grace's Truth. Share your own story in the comments. Your voice could be someone else's light. And remember, the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. Be brave enough to hear them.